Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation. It is on mastering the recruiting and hiring process. Helpful information. I'd like to thank Leslie Demattia for presenting today, and I'm going to hand it over to her.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gerald. Well, thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking about mastering and recruiting the hiring and recruitment process. And there's a lot of things involved in that. So today's objectives are going to be job descriptions, interview process, hiring, and background checks. And we want to talk about those extensively, and we want to talk about putting in the time necessary to make that happen. Okay, so let's just dig right in. Planning the process. The process isn't hard, but what I find with a lot of religious nonprofits, churches, camps, ministries, those types of things, is that sometimes they're in such a hurry to fill positions that they don't take the time necessary to plan out really what they need. It doesn't take a lot. It just takes time, thought, and then getting those thoughts on paper. So my encouragement to you today is to take the time to plan out the process. Instead of being in such a hurry to fill positions that are empty or that somebody's leaving, take the time to really sit down. It's really time to think about not only what you need, but maybe even change the position or create a different position. And if you take a breath and you take a step back and you take the time to say, okay, what do we really need to complete this ministry? It really gives you kind of carte blanche to dream and to think and to come up with some new ideas. So I'm encouraging you to take that time. If you're lazy and you cut corners in your process, you will hire employees who are lazy and cut corners in their process. So make sure that you're putting your best effort forward. Recently, I sat on a panel of interviews, and I was a little bit dismayed because the interview that I sat on, the people were not prepared. They didn't have their questions prepared on what they were going to ask the interviewees. And it basically made the employer look like they didn't have all of their ducks in a row and that they weren't prepared to really make this hire. What's interesting is no one accepted an offer. So they had a first and second and third candidate. And it was apparent from their lack of planning that they portrayed what it was like to work there. So when you are portraying what you are when you go through that process. So you want to be professional. You want to share your ministry side and your ministry culture, but you also want to have everything ready to go. So let's talk about job descriptions and why we want to have them. Okay, job descriptions are very important because we want to make sure that we have actually all the stuff that we really think about in a job description. We want to have it so that it captures the job and what it really is to be in that job, okay? And one of the things I would say is this. When you're writing a job description, think of everything. You don't have to put everything in there, but think of everything. Dream a little. Think about what you want your employees to do, what you want them to be like, what the position is going to entail, even down to the details. So I just put a couple of templates up here so you could actually look at some sample templates. Now I took out the meat of these so that you could just see the areas in which you need to fill in. Okay, so the title, who the person reports to. One big thing is the employment status. Are they exempt, non-exempt, or are they exempt ministerial exception? And let's talk about that a little bit. Make sure that you do your work to classify your employees correctly depending upon what state you live in. Each state has different rules regarding white-collar exemptions. So make sure you do your work before you put something out there so employees really know what is required of them. Also, membership, if there's some type of membership involved, if you're in a church, I don't think camps require membership, but if there's some type of ministry organization where there's a membership required, state that. The position summary, this is where you have a few seconds to capture somebody's attention. And what I say is put your best effort here. Because if you write a really good position summary, you could actually use that for your job posting, okay? It can also be where you kind of tell a little bit about what's going on and how it is to work in your environment, all right? Make sure that you list out all your essential duties and responsibilities, any minimum qualifications. This is where you write the detailed responsibilities of what they're going to do, abilities that they have to have, and I left a couple of things in here so you guys could kind of get the idea. And what's really interesting is some churches insert a short history about their church. This is not imperative for lower level positions, but if you're hiring, say, a director of camps or a pastor of a church or a high level position, you're probably going to be recruiting across, who knows, the nation or outside the nation or whatever. So you want to make sure that you are putting a little snapshot here. This is where we live. This is what it's like to live here. This is what it's like to work here. So make sure you include all of that information on your job description if it's a high-level executive position. Okay. Here's another job description template, okay? This is for director of camps. This one's a little more detailed. It says what department this person works in. It talks about the classification. Again, remember, put the time in to decide, is this a exempt, non-exempt, or exempt ministerial exception position? Education required, credentials, ministry experience. This is important information. This job description is a little more detailed than the last, so I kind of wanted you to see the different options you have. Here's a position summary that was written. It says, the director of Camp Connection will lead adults to anchor their life and hope in Jesus. He will nurture their faith toward engagement and connect groups. He must shepherd, mentor, teach, develop staff, and volunteers associated with ministry area. That is an okay position summary. It's just okay. Here's some clips I actually printed out this morning for you guys to read. This is awesome. Assistant Camp Director, Boring, Oregon. Okay, first of all, if you live in Boring, Oregon, I don't know who would want to go there for a job. But anyway, Boring, Oregon. And if you're from Boring, Oregon, I apologize. I'm sure you have a great job. But this is what they wrote. Upload resume, complete job application. That's it. They didn't have a summary for their online posting. But listen to this one. Blank camps are a brilliant place to work. Our awesome summer team is supportive and a tight-knit group. We care for each other and we take care of our campers. We are all in this together and make a brilliant, rewarding difference in both the lives of our campers, our team, and ourselves. And then it goes on to say where this camp is located and that they're looking for an upbeat, resourceful leader, and then it lists kind of the main oversight areas of this camp position. So to me, that's a little bit more exciting. If I was reading that, I'd be like, I think I might apply for that job. So those are just some different examples of job summaries, job classifications, job templates that you can use. And if you have any questions about those, you can ask at the end. Okay? So moving forward with our job descriptions, the key to a job description is job capture. And that means you want to capture really the essence of what it's like to have the position and actually everything that's included in the position. And I say everything that's included. I always add a line on my job descriptions that say, and additional duties as assigned, or additional pastoral duties as assigned, or additional director duties as assigned, or just additional duties as needed to complete ministry functions, okay? So again, spend the time necessary to create a job description which accurately describes what you are looking for. A shoddy or inferior job description ensures a shoddy employee. The other thing I want to say is when you don't take the time to put your best foot forward when you're doing a job announcement or job summary and a job description, it shows, and it's not going to attract the quality of person that you want. So don't be in a hurry. I know there's pressures for ministry to fill positions, and there's pressures in ministry to get more people to get the ministry done, to get the word out there. But the fact of the matter is it only takes once. Once you do this and you start doing it for all of your upcoming positions, once you have them all done, it's easy to just modify them when you're filling a new position. All right. So as we continue to talk about job descriptions, here's some minimum job description requirements. You want title, classification, department if it's applicable, who they report to, who they are going to supervise, our job summary, which remember we talked about, which is the job summary that can be used for the job announcement, responsibilities, qualifications, and always other duties as assigned. And you can word that however you want, but make sure that you are also in qualifications, including educational requirements. And I think it's very important that you put that down there. And you can put bachelor degree preferred, however, experience will be considered. You can put all those types of things. But if you really want a degree, then put it down there, okay? So let's talk about some other job summary examples. This is really what I call key capture, and this is where we want to make sure, like I said as I was reading you some examples, that you make people excited about coming to work there. So here's one that I recently found. Handles all administrative responsibilities and requests, including travel arrangements. That doesn't really tell you anything about what it's like to work there or what you'll be doing other than administrative responsibilities and travel arrangements. Actually, I might apply for that job because it looks really easy. Anyway, here's another one. The pastoral administrative assistant will be responsible for performing a number of administrative duties for the family pastor, creative pastor, and elders. This individual must work with a high level of independence, initiative, confidentiality, discretion, accuracy, reliability, and be task-oriented and be attentive to detail. Well, that's a little better, right? That's kind of getting it, but I'm really not sure exactly what that person will be doing. But here's another one. Experienced, reliable, task-oriented individual will work directly with the executive and lead pastor and be responsible for performing a variety of administrative duties. Provide support to administrative assistants, executive leadership. You don't need me to read it to you. You can keep reading and see that it really talks about what this position will be doing. One of the things that's not in here, like I said, that I really, really like is what your team environment is like. What's it like to work there? And don't be afraid to tell the truth. If you work at a highly professional, more corporate ministry type of organization, write it. God gets people to work in those areas as well as working in some camp environment where it's fun and it's super happy and it's a little more loose. But make sure that you describe your culture well, because if you say that you're a super fun, easygoing place to work, but then you expect everybody to show up in a suit and tie, that's not really communicating correctly what you're looking for, okay? So after we create the job description and we make sure we have our job summary that's going to attract attention, we want to move forward to the interview process, okay? Job interviews provide you an opportunity for your potential employee and you to see if you guys are going to be a good fit, to see if their skills align with what you're looking for, to meet the person either electronically or in person to see if, wow, they really could fit here, or no, I don't think they can fit here. And I think ministries sometimes play this part down. It's imperative that you use the interview to find fit. Not just fit to the job description, but fit in your culture, fit in your ministry, fit in what you guys believe, okay? So ask scenario questions. I think a lot of times we just ask questions like, why are you qualified for this job? What was your previous experience? Those types of things. But let's say, for instance, you're hiring somebody for a youth position or somebody that's going to work with a youth pastor, or for example, this is a question we asked at my church when we were going to hire youth pastors. How would you handle working with two highly motivated, creative, and non-administrative youth pastors? Why? Because we were hiring an administrative assistant for that position, and we wanted that person to know right away, because you're hiring an administrative assistant. Most administrative assistants are super organized and detail-oriented, and they're going to be working in an environment with two highly creative youth pastors. Now, I'm not saying all youth pastors are not creative. It just so happens, are not administrative, but it just so happens that our youth pastors were not administrative. That's why we were hiring somebody to come in and do the administration. But the fact of the matter is, most people that are highly organized get a little frustrated sometimes with people who aren't. So we wanted to say up front, can you love these people enough, right, to bring what is missing to our organization to help that and work with them? And, it was really fabulous. We were able to hire somebody who was super administratively gifted and also somebody who understood and had an appreciation and a love of these creative ministry folks who just loved the kids and wanted to do this kind of thing. So you want to put your best foot forward and ask questions that are really going to capture the answers to find out if you have a good fit. I love this one too. How would you handle a congregant that wants to pay for new paint but wants to pick out the color? That's difficult, isn't it? Because we don't really know sometimes what's behind people's motivation. And the fact of the matter is those take lots of conversation. So that's what you want your interviewee to say. You want them to say like, well, I would really thank them for their donation and tell them how much we appreciate their generosity, and maybe even pull in some other leadership people to talk about it. Because we already had a color scheme, or because we want to work through the color scheme. Maybe the person could be on the color scheme team, those types of things. But you want to make sure that somebody's answering the questions that are really true to what's going on in your ministry area, okay? So don't downplay your interviews. What I usually do is I create a list of standard questions like, tell us about your job history. Tell us about why you want this position. Tell us why you're qualified. And then when I'm using I usually use a hiring team, a cross ministry hiring team. Like I'll put somebody from the janitorial department. If we're hiring for a youth pastor, I'll put somebody on the janitorial department. I'll put somebody at the front desk. I'll take another pastor. I do a cross ministry pick for my interview team. And what I do is then I send out potential questions that might touch each area, and then we all agree upon the questions. And then as we ask those scenario questions, people take turns asking them. And we even actually discuss, like, what are we looking for in an answer? Sometimes people don't know your ministry culture, which is fine, but you want to make sure that their thought process and reasoning, even if they don't have the right parameters, are correct. Okay? So let's talk about hiring. Let's be prepared. So yesterday I was working in a Southern California ministry, and I was called in, thank goodness, to help them prepare a lot of their hire paperwork. And one of the things I found was old copies of like policies that were, you could tell like through the font, there was no logo on the page, and even it had been photocopied so many times that you couldn't even read the writing on it. And it was very hard to read. And I thought, wow, this is what they're putting in their hire packet? Like your hire packet photocopies, if you're photocopying stuff, should be awesome. They should look like they just came out of the press with your logo on them and very professional. I also noticed in these hire packets that they hadn't taken the time to rewrite some of their policies. And one of their policies referred them, it was a Christian morality lifestyle policy. And as I was reading it, it referred them to a website to look at that policy, to look at what those things really were, what was required in the Christian morality agreement, with all the details. And so I went to the website, and it no longer existed. And it was like, okay, well, that's not very professional. You're not putting your best foot forward. So make sure that your hire packet looks amazing. It looks super professional. It's very well put together. All the forms are required. You have a checklist of what they have to fill out. Please put your best effort there. If you put your best effort in that hiring process, first of all, from the very beginning of planning the job description to the interviews and now the hiring process, you're telling them what kind of organization they're going to work for. But not only that, you're telling them what's expected of them. If you present a unprepared or unprofessional or shoddy hire packet, you're telling them, hey, it's okay, we just do things to get by, and when you get hired here, you just got to do what you got to do to get by. And that's not really what you want. The other thing that I want you to include in your hiring packets is a statement of faith. What you believe, not just what theology, which we'll get to next, but what you actually believe. What are your core values, mission statement, vision statement, and your statement of beliefs? The reason why I say this is because recently I received a phone call and they said, hey, Leslie, we want to fire this pastor. And I said, okay. And I said, tell me why. And I knew this pastor had been a beloved pastor. And they said, well, he does not agree to our statement of faith. And he'd been there 10 years. And I was like, well, did you have him sign the statement of faith, read the statement of faith? Did he say he understood the statement of faith? So you don't want to be caught in that position. You want to make sure that everybody up front knows what you believe as an organization, okay? Also, position papers. If you have position papers on social issues that you believe the Bible says this way or that way, or you have position papers on how people are supposed to behave or any of those types of things, I would ask you to put those in your hiring packet. This way it's up front and everybody knows exactly what's expected of them. The other thing I would say is please, please, please make sure, or at least ask the question in an interview. Do you have any theological differences with our ministry here? Is there anything that you would have a problem with, or even so far as to write out your theology? If you have a theology, some camps may not have a theology or a smaller theology. Some might have a large theology. Just make sure you know what that is so that you can express that. And I would prefer in writing because, of course, I'm the HR professional, and that they would agree to that. The whole point of all of this is to basically ensure that there's no surprises. And after somebody's hired, they're not misled, that they really have a good idea of what it's going to be like to work there, what's expected of them, and there won't be any problems like, hey, we need to fire this somebody because they don't believe in our statement of faith, okay? One of the other things I want to talk about in hiring before we get to backgrounds is red flags. When you're in the process of hiring somebody, both in the interview and in the hiring process, as you're talking to people, I want to talk to you about some red flags, okay? Prior employment who refuses to give you any information, for instance, let's say you're calling and checking on references, and they refuse to give you information. Now, the standard is we only give out dates of employment and salary information, and now you can't even give salary information in some states. But have you ever called and somebody who has a fabulous employee, usually they want to tell you about how fabulous they were and what a great impact they left on their organization. So that's just a red flag. Gaps of time between unemployment is a red flag. Somebody who jumps around from job to job and only stays at a job for like a year or two, that moves around a lot. Now, there might be a legitimate reason for that, but this is just a red flag, like to check. Candidate is late for the interview, or the candidate's disheveled or unprepared. If they complain about previous employers, that's a clue that something's not quite right. Candidates can't really explain why they left previous jobs or they give strange reasons. Another really good one that people don't realize is if a school will not release transcripts. Usually if you are going to verify education, schools will release a transcript at either the potential employee's request or at your request. When they do not release transcripts, it's usually because the student, whoever the student was, your potential employee, has a huge debt that they haven't paid. That is usually why they do not release transcripts. One of the other questions I love to ask in an interview process is, tell me about a time in your life where you made a mistake or you had a failure and you learned from it. If a candidate cannot share something that they've learned from a mistake or a failure, it shows that they don't have the ability, or they're not comfortable sharing how they learned and how they could make a mistake and move on and grow from that. And that's really a good thing to have in ministry. If the candidate is more interested in salary and benefits than the job itself, that's not really a good thing either. Candidates don't fill out the application completely. A lot of people do applications and resume, or just an application or just a resume. Because I'm HR, I always say do application and resume. I compare the two to make sure that everything on the application matches the resume. If it doesn't, that's a problem. And if you ask the potential employee to fill out the application completely and then they don't, that tells you that they don't pay attention to detail. Candidates must, if they've used multiple names, that in and of itself is not a deterrent. It's just a check, like, okay, is there something wrong here, or why did the name change so many times? And there might be a legitimate reason, but it's always a good question to follow up on. The other thing I always do in an interview is I ask, even during the hiring process, I ask if a candidate has any questions. And usually candidates that are really interested in the job, they'll research on your website, they'll take notes when they have conversations with you leading up to the interview and through the hiring process and those types of things. So what's really interesting is they should have questions. They should have questions for you, and they should have had them prepared. If candidates give vague answers to my direct questions when pressed for details, that's a red flag, okay? If they can't substantiate their resume claims, like if you're looking at their resume during the interview or the hiring process and you just ask them a question about it, they should be able to easily answer on their resume. They should know their resume well. They lived it, right? So they should be able to share that. And if the candidate doesn't make eye contact, that's kind of hard because you want somebody who's confident enough to work in and out of ministry and deal with people. Or maybe you have a position that it's a position in the back office where somebody doesn't have to deal with people often, and maybe that's okay. If the candidate has demands up front, that's always a red flag. Or if they have poor listening skills. Now, it's common in an interview for people to say, could you repeat that question? Because a lot of times they're trying to formulate their answer. That's fine. But if they don't quite get what you're saying or you're having to repeat it multiple times, then of course that would be a red flag. Okay? So if you have any other questions about red flags, we can chat about that. So let's move on to background. Okay? You have completed your job description with your job summary. You've got all your hiring documents ready to go, and they're professional and well presented. You've gone through the interview process. You're now through the hiring process, and now we're at backgrounds. One of the things I would say is check with your state laws because state law determines when you can do your backgrounds. In some states, you can do them pre-offer. In some states, you have to do them post-offer and a conditional acceptance letter saying, if you're the highest candidate in this position, and we'd like to offer you the position, but it's conditional upon this post-offer background check. Make sure that you handle anything that comes up on their background. Do not dismiss it. So, for instance, let's say there's a speeding ticket. We're not going to refuse to hire somebody because they have a speeding ticket, but ask them about it. Why? Because you want them to be honest. You want them to say, hey, I was speeding, right? We've all sped. Well, most of us have sped. I'm sure there's some of you that have never sped. And the other thing, too, is we want to make sure that if there's anything that precludes them from having the position on the background, that you have that discussion with them. Now, that also, you need to make sure that you're functioning within your state law here because some states require a process of how you discuss stuff that comes up on the backgrounds. Other states are just like, if you don't want to hire them because what's on their background is great. But I would always do this. This is an opportunity to minister to a candidate, right? So if you have somebody who maybe has, say, for instance, a drunk driving, this is a time for you. Now, maybe it's all dealt with and they're fine. It happened when they were super young or something like that. But you want to make sure you have the opportunity to say, hey, we really, really appreciate you, and can you tell me about the situation? And that may or may not determine if you hire them or don't hire them. So as we wrap up this discussion on mastering the recruiting process, the best advice I can give you is master your process first. Make sure that all of your items, anything you're going to give the candidate, anything you're going to post online, anything that is in paper form, that it is your best foot forward. Remember, you're portraying, when you're in a hiring process, it's not just you, we want to go get somebody and we need to fill this position. It's really about who are we and who do we want to work here? And we need to find out the best candidate to fit our organization or our ministry. And so if you do the work first, then it's highly likely that it will put your best foot forward, and then you'll get the best candidates for your position. All right, we're going to wrap it up. If we have any questions, we can answer those now.
I have a few, actually. So going back to job descriptions, is there a best way to tailor them to online networks? Is it any different than what you would do on like a job board versus a LinkedIn versus posting in some other manner?
Right. What I always do is if, like, for instance, the one that I read you that was like just fill out the resume and whatever, I think what I would always do is I would have a link. So if you're doing a job board or you're doing LinkedIn or you're doing Indeed or those types of things and they only capture a little bit of information, there's always an opportunity to attach the job description or say for full details of the job, please follow this. Go to this website and download the full job description before applying. I always say that. I want them to read exactly everything we're looking for before they apply for the job.
Okay. And then your thoughts on recruiters, like a ZipRecruiter versus a professional recruiting service. Do you experience those in the? Okay.
Sure. So there's so the big ones right now are Slingshot and Vanderbloemen. Those are the big recruiting firms for like high level positions. I have worked with both of those. They have been fabulous. I think it just depends on what the church is looking for and their budget. I think that we need to make sure that we have the finances to do so. I don't think they're always necessary. And I've been in situations where both the outcome of using a recruiter was positive and the outcome of using a recruiter was negative. So I think you got to kind of find out what fits for your organization, and do you have the time to do all the work? Even when you use a recruiter, they ask for so much information, you have to put your best foot forward because they're asking you, like, send me the job description, send me a snapshot about what it's like to work there. So there's still work involved. So I think it's just an individual choice on what the ministry wants to do.
Okay. On to the interview. You mentioned that you put an interview team together and it's cross-functional. Do you have a size that you prefer or a range of number of people that are best?
Yeah, so that's a great question. 3 to 5 normally, but if it's a high-level position, say we're hiring an executive pastor, or how about a camp director? Say we're hiring a camp director. One of the things I would do is I would be willing to go probably to 7, but what I would also do is have multiple interviews. I would have a first round of interviews with the 3 to 7 people to make sure I could get a good cross-cultural team or a cross-ministry team. And then what I would do is I would say, okay, now you might have to have 3 or 4 smaller interviews with smaller teams.
Okay, great. Second question on interviewing. I think you briefly touched on it, so I know the trend out there in the corporate world is behavioral questions. How do you deal with this in a certain circumstance, or how do you overcome obstacles? What's your biggest obstacles? Do you experience those as well?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So instead of, So instead of, what have you done in your past, kind of looking to gauge behavior and how they respond in, under certain circumstances. So what's the biggest obstacle you overcame and how? I noticed that that's the trend now versus, how much did you sell? How many people have you pastored over? Questions such as those.
Right. Yeah. So I always like both of those questions, really. I like to know how many people they pastored, how many people were in their ministry, all those types of things. And then I like to either say, tell me about a failure and how you overcame it, because you can see kind of the process they went through to either grow or they didn't grow. And I think that gives the hiring authority so much insight into, okay, this guy's vulnerable. First of all, he's willing to share, or she's willing to share when something didn't go right. And then they're totally willing to share, this is what I learned, this is how I would do it different. And how that whole process went. I see both questions, so I wouldn't necessarily ignore the how many did you minister, blah, 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 and just get the behavioral questions. But the reason why I put in my presentation today was because I think sometimes people still ignore the how would you behave, how would you react questions.
Okay. All right. Great. Last question. How do you best gauge cultural fit? Someone can have a great resume, they can interview great, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to fit in with your team well. How do you go about determining who you think is best going to fit in with the current staff?
Yeah, that's hard because you only have so many interviews and you only have so much information, and so you're trying best to make a quick judgment. Really, even if you have like 4 or 5 interviews, it's a quick judgment. And so that's why I say make sure that your job capture is correct, and that on your job description you're writing what your culture is like, and that can always be done kind of in the history. So, for instance, I actually attend a church that is trying to be hip. But we are multi-generational, and so we're hip in certain parts and we're not hip in other parts. And so what I describe our church as is we are a church that's moving forward. We're multi-generational. We appreciate all the different generations in our church while we're still trying to, grow the church. Because if you don't bring younger, new people in your church, it dies. So we explain it that way. Like it's not just we're the hip and upcoming church. We actually are multi-generational and we celebrate that. So I think job capture is super important, meaning you have to really tell these people like it is. And then the only way you can judge fit is really by interviewing. And that's why I say don't rush the interview process, or you can even have multiple interviews. I think it's imperative to spend time with these people. One of the things we do is we send them through a couple of interviews. Now, I'm talking about higher level positions, directors, maybe a pastor, a camp director, those types of things. And then what we do is we have them meet with like a team of our volunteers. Hey, go have lunch with our volunteers here or there. And then those people all can also give input too. So that's how we handle it.
Okay, that's great. That's it for questions, I think. And then if you want to make any closing statements, we can wrap this up. I want to thank everyone for attending and viewing, and I especially want to thank Leslie for agreeing to present, and fabulous job.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Of course, if you have any questions or you need anything, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much to the insurance board, and you all have a blessed day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.